Welcome back to No Apologies on BEK, your after-hours oasis of sanity despite feeling otherwise. I'm your host, Rick Becker, co-host Lori Hintz, and Bob Harms.
Good to have you.
Welcome.
Very good to have you.
Excited to have you on the show.
Describe yourself as a taxpayer, a lawyer, and one of the architects of the Legacy Fund, which was crafted back in 2000, well, like earlier than 2010, right? It was voted in 2010?
2010, it was voted on by the voters of North Dakota, yeah.
Yeah. So Legacy Fund discussions are everywhere. They're in a multitude of bills. We hear complaints of this and we hear concerns of that, but can you start us off? So since you're one of the architects, you know the history of it from the get-go.
Sure.
Inform our viewers, because it's been now well over 10 years since the inception of this. Let them know what it's all about.
Well, the Legacy Fund really grew out of what was known as the Permanent Oil Trust Fund that was created in 1997 under Governor Schaefer's administration. He saw our state spending going like this and that we were spending a declining revenue stream, oil, and so he created, with the help of the legislature, a Permanent Oil Trust Fund in '97. That continued, it accumulated some monies in the Hoeven administration, and then the governor at that time and the legislature began to invade the Permanent Oil Trust Fund, which became known as the Not So Permanent Oil Trust Fund.
Yep.
Right.
And so they were taking it. So a group got together in 2007, put a measure on the ballot to create a constitutionally protected trust fund in 2008. That was defeated. Governor Hoeven actually campaigned against it, which I was a little unhappy with. But and so then we took another swing at it in 2009, reconfigured it, and went to the ballot, talked to the voters, said, hey, this is something that will ensure our children's future once oil revenues decline. The concept was basically take oil, convert it to cash, keep the cash, and use the earnings to replace oil revenues when they decline, which we know they will.
They happen.
So that's the basic concept and the idea behind the Legacy Fund. Today we have $8.2 billion in it, about 2.6 of which is from earnings. The way the measure was crafted, the legislature couldn't address or use any of the earnings until 2017. And so we have now $8.2 billion in the Legacy Fund that's there to serve the purpose that we just talked about.
Interesting. Yeah. Are you wishing now that the timing for tapping into the earnings might have been pushed later, or are you happy?
I am. No, I think that it would have maybe been smart if we would have put it off another 5 or 6 years. I think, the more, we learned this when we were kids, the power of compound interest. And the more we put those earnings back into the bank, the bigger the fund is going to go, and the more it will be able to meet our needs in the future when oil revenues decline.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I know one of the bills that they were looking at with some of the streams, and they're trying to put it into a bill that also had pension reform in it. One of the stream concepts was that there would be a specific stream that ran back to go into the principle of the Legacy Fund, and I thought that was a great idea.
Right, yeah. And I think some of that conversation is still in play. I don't know where that's going to go. The only bill, and we can talk about 3 or 4 of the bills that have addressed Legacy Funds in a minute or two. There's only one left in play, and that's House Bill 1380. That's what's called the Legacy Streams Bill, and it's got about 10 different buckets, and we can talk about whether or not that's a good policy format or structure to use in legislation and in using and managing this fund. But one of the things that I think we should all talk about is, and one of the concerns I've had is, where is the state going financially? This fund was created to do just what I said. When oil revenues go down, this fund should be there, and its earnings should replace that declining revenue stream. And so what I've done is I've gone, and I think you've got some graphics that show the general fund that we have in North Dakota. And so what I've done is I've taken this 20-year period. These are legislative council figures. We started at $1.75 billion in 2000, and today we're at $4.8 billion. That's a 13.7% annual growth rate. So I thought, all right, well, let's see where we go at that same rate of growth in 10 years. And if you do the math, you end up with $17 billion general fund.
Wow.
Which is just mind-boggling to me.
Horrific.
Yes.
So keep that number in mind, $17 billion by 2031. And then let's go to the next graph, because the next visual. One of the other things that we did, these are legislative council numbers as well, and go to the bottom, and that 27% number, basically what that says is the general fund that we have in North Dakota, one of every $4 comes out of the oil and gas revenue. So that $17 billion that we were talking about 10 years from now, that's going to be, if we stay the course and we continue to rely on the oil industry to the tune of 27% of the general fund, we end up with $4.6 billion that we need from the oil industry in 10 years. And so if we have a hiccup,
Yeah. Is that even sustainable?
well, that's the concern I think that we all should have. I mean, I think we should use the legacy fund wisely, but I'm also concerned about the state's financial condition and where we are going to be 10 years from now if we need $4.6 billion from the oil industry just to stay even at what we're doing today.
Yep.
You know,
And
that's a concern.
I think that's a brilliant observation, because the hiccup is inevitably going to come.
Right.
It will. And we are rating, and I'll say rating the legacy fund, even though we're not taking the principal.
Right.
But we are taking the earnings which would have gone to the principal to build up for when we have the hiccup.
Right.
Because as it stands now, when we're finding every way we can to spend all of the earnings and we're preventing the principal from growing, when we have the hiccup, the principal won't be big enough to provide the earnings that can cover the hiccup.
Right. Right.
And I'm apparently most of my fellow legislators don't see it that way.
Well, those corrections always come. You always have booms and busts, and it's inevitable, so why not plan?
Well, they do, and we have another visual. This is another product from the Legislative Council, and it just reminds us of our 2015 bust. And at that time, we ended up invading and using every savings account that we had banked over years and years to stay even because of the decline in the oil revenues in the 2015-2017 cycle. We had a special session, took $1 billion out of the budget, and you know the graph shows we took another 7% reduction after they reconvened. And so that's just an example most recently about of the hiccups that we risk by being so dependent on oil revenues. The other thing that was interesting about that graphic, the top line shows that 50% of our revenues in the state come from the oil industry. 27% of the general fund is from that industry, but it's a big deal, and it's something that every taxpayer should be concerned about. I'm particularly concerned about it, not so much now, but 10 years from now.
In the future. Yep.
I couldn't agree more. I don't know. We're putting ourselves in a precarious situation.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's going to be because of things like a Biden administration. I don't know if it's going to be weird fluctuations in supply and demand of oil. I don't know. But the thing is, we have to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
Pipelines being shut down. Number of things can happen with this administration, too.
Right.
We just have to be ready for that.
Yeah.
Or Elon Musk has the
Musk,
breakthrough
right?
that actually has,
Right.
you know, cars that work great.
Worldwide implications.
Yeah, indeed.
It absolutely does. All right. So I think, Bob, what we're going to do is come back with you in the next segment, talk about some other ramifications of this legacy fund, discuss some of the bills that you were referencing, touch on 1380. So we've got a lot of stuff to cover. Great?
Great.
All right, folks, hang with us. We will be back in just a minute or so.
We're the ladies of Another View, bringing you a fresh view on local issues.
And different perspectives you won't get on the mainstream media. Watch us weekday afternoons at 4:30 Central Time on BEK News and at BEK.news.
When you're buying windows, make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Hi, I'm Jesse with the Window Source. We only sell you the best windows and doors for the best price. Call the Window Source. Just because you pay less doesn't mean you get less.
If you don't know what's going on in education in this country, then you don't know what's going to happen in the future of this country. And it's important. I'm Dr. Duke.
And I'm Katie.
Watch the Dr. Duke Show weekdays at 4 p.m. Central Time on BEK TV.
Every great pizza has a secret. At New York To Go, that secret lies in our perfectly recreated New York water, the key ingredient to making our signature New York-style pizza. We also feature gyros, with the region's only gyro meat spit, plus Nathan's hot dogs, calzones, and our delicious jumbo buffalo wings. Try a 14-inch or our special giant 20-inch pizza tonight. You gotta know how to fold them if you want to hold them. New York To Go, we deliver for you.
It's every American's right to bear arms. At Mandan Sporting Goods, we're here to help you support your Second Amendment rights, which reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Whether you're looking for a pistol for personal defense or collector gun, we have the staff to help you. We also have the area's largest inventory of ammo and reloading supplies.
Mandan Sporting Goods, the area's local gun and ammo specialists.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, and as you know, my passion is to help each and every one of you get the best sleep of your life. That's why I created my new Giza Dreams bed sheets. I started by using the world's best cotton called Giza. It's only grown in a region between the Sahara Desert, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Nile River. It's ultra soft and breathable, but extremely durable. My Giza sheets also include full 21-inch wide pillowcases that will fit over any pillow and deep pocket sheets that will fit over any mattress. The first night you sleep on my sheets, you'll never want to sleep on anything else.
Go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen right now to get your very own MyPillow Giza Dream Sheets. Giza Dream Sheets are available in a variety of colors. Use your promo code, and for a limited time, when you buy one set of sheets, you'll get another set absolutely free.
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
All right, welcome back. It's No Apologies, and we have Bob Harms with us, one of the guys that was instrumental in the implementation of the Legacy Fund. We're talking about the Legacy Fund and the earnings and what it means and how it prevents us from getting into a very bad place because we're in a situation in which we rely on the commodity known as oil. So we kind of covered the history there and the state's financial position. You referenced that there were a few bills with maybe only one left. Can you kind of touch on what bills we saw in the legislature, what was the outcome, and where we're at right now with only about 2 days left?
Sure. So there are really four bills that I think were keenly focused on legacy. 1431, that's called the Legacy Bonding Bill, and that started in the House at about $680 million. Went over to the Senate, got loaded up to $1.1 billion there. The Senate cut it back to the original House version, $680 million. Mysteriously, I'm not sure as to why, passed it out of the Senate, went to the governor. That's $680 million of bonding. It's mostly water projects, and we all probably would support the water projects themselves. A couple of concerns that I had about that bill. One is that it issues $680 million of legacy fund bonds, and then those bonds are paid for by legacy fund earnings. And so you have a 20-year funding stream that pays for those bonds issued by City of Fargo, Minot, a host of other water projects, and a couple of other smaller items. But that's a key concern. It essentially dedicates about $1 billion of future earnings that would have otherwise gone into the legacy fund permanent or be available for meeting the primary need that we've talked about before. So 1431 is one bill. Probably the key policy concern, I would have two key policy concerns. One is the fact that legacy fund earnings are being used to pay the bond payments themselves.
Right.
And two, really the water community is kind of double dipping on that deal. They have the Resources Trust Fund that comes out of oil revenue as well. and that funds most of our water projects, whether it's water development or flood control projects in North Dakota. That fund at its high point, I think, was generating about $800 million per biennium. So they have that fund already. Now they're sort of double dipping into the legacy fund to front load these projects on. So that's one, House Bill 1431.
Let me just say, one of the biggest concerns I have with that, my perspective is that I understand the lure of wanting to borrow because interest rates are so low. You can borrow, do something big infrastructure now, the construction costs are only going to get higher. However, you cannot get away from the idea that not only are we spending the legacy fund earnings right now for ongoing spending, really, but by bonding, we're committing future legislatures legacy fund earnings on what it's already committed. We're handcuffing them.
Well, that's exactly right, and that's a key policy concern in some of these other bills that we're going to talk about too. Is that what we're doing is we're essentially preempting future legislatures, thinking that in 2021 we know exactly what our state's needs will be for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 20 years.
Yeah, nobody can know that.
That we know better
Right.
than they might. And one of the things that we've talked about, I've said openly, the legacy fund doesn't have any earmarks or designated purposes, and we argued about that, debated in the 2009 legislative session, and we arrived at the conclusion that best to not have any attachments, earmarks, expressed purposes, so that a legislature in 2025 can better address the needs of our people then, as opposed to us presuming to know what those would be in 2009. So that's a key policy objection I have with a good share of the bills that address legacy funds, is they presume to know better in 2021 what our state's needs will be in 2025 or 27 or 29.
Yep, well said.
Yeah, so that's one of the bills, would be House Bill 1431.
Okay. And what other bills are we?
Well, the other one, I didn't pay that much attention to. This one, I opposed it for a couple reasons, but that's House Bill 1425. And House Bill 1425, to most people, would be known as Let's Invest Legacy Fund Dollars in North Dakota. And that's a great idea.
Of course.
There isn't a North Dakotan that would disagree with the idea that we should be investing legacy fund dollars in our state. I don't think anybody would agree, would disagree with that notion. The problem that the bill has is it gets kind of a schizophrenic treatment, because the bill says these are targets, these are not mandates, but it gets talked about in the press as if they are mandates. And 20% of the fund is supposed to be invested in North Dakota. Now, if the legislature was going to spend that 20%, they would actually have to reach a 2/3 threshold supermajority that is called for by the Constitution. But so that's one aspect of that 1425. The other thing it does is it creates basically a local infrastructure revolving loan fund at a 2% cost. Now, you know, I grew up in Tioga. I want Tioga to have good financing. I want to have good roads and water systems and all that. But it does take 2% is the legislatively established interest rate for local government. And then the other thing that you have to look at is the legacy fund makes about 9.5% most recently on an annualized basis. If you go back to 2020, it's really 6%. I think that's more of a legitimate number over the long haul. So you're going to take 6% of the earnings and reduce it automatically down to 2%. So you're giving away 4% of the earnings. So that's another thing that I didn't particularly like about that. The other thing about that bill is it also speaks to an exemption of the prudent investor rule, which causes some concerns. And then the other thing is that it has some language in it that a North Dakota firm has preference to manage the legacy fund portion of that bill. And as you listen to the hearing testimony, it's not a mandate, but yeah, we want North Dakota firms to manage and take care of our money, but we also run into a problem if we say, hey, the Harms Financial Company is going to manage the legacy fund piece because I'm located in North Dakota. I may not be qualified. There may be a better firm in Sioux Falls, or who knows. So that's another bill. And then the third one, and the only one that remains, is House Bill 1380, and that's probably the one that's got the most challenges, I think, because of some of the policy issues. It does a couple things. It mandates that we spend 8% of the earnings in a biennium. That's 4% annually. That's different than any of the recommendations that we've gotten. There was a study done in 2014 by the Great Plains Institute. Took several dozen North Dakota leaders around, took them months. They debated. Their recommendation to the legislature was save 75% of the earnings, invest 25%. We're doing just the opposite. We're going to spend 75 to 90% of the earnings as opposed to saving most of it. So that's a key concern, 8%. That came out of the House at 6%, a 3 and 3. That was one problem. The other thing that it does is it sets up 10 or 11 different buckets. They call it streams, but it's got a bucket 20% for this and 25% for that and 30% for this and 15% for that and 5% for this. And that's a concern just from a budgeting standpoint. A couple weeks ago we had Rod Backman on the radio talking about this, and Backman was the O&B director for Schaefer and for Hoban. And he said, you know, really what you should be doing from a budgeting perspective is having people come in and compete for dollars as opposed to establishing these buckets that now
idea.
Are their, it's their money. So that's the process is
people
bad.
View it as their money.
Exactly. And then the other thing that we're going to do with these 10 or 11 buckets, we'll create these constituencies that expect that money to remain theirs, whether it's the university system or the tourism department or the highway department or whomever.
Yeah.
That's
and it
a problem.
becomes an entitlement.
That's exactly right. And then try to take that money back. And here's this is another problem that really rubs me wrong on this one, is 1380. Again, these are ongoing appropriations, so they last forever. And the last thing that it does is it calls for the legacy fund to pay the tab.
Yep.
So legacy fund earnings, once again, being used to pay for these bills. And back to your point, we're preempting equally smart legislators in the future for years and years to come.
Big concern.
Just a brilliant analysis of what's going on with the Legacy Fund. Thank you very much for coming today, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
Happy to do it. You bet.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Appreciate it.
Folks, hang with us. We've got brain food next. We'll be right back.